Hello and welcome to episode 417 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 11th of May, 2023. I'm Marsh Davis and I'm joined tonight by Jamie Britton.
Hello, we've met in real life now.
We have. Yeah, what a date that was.
2 dates. I managed to number close and get to a second date.
Double Marty.
Which also had another Crate and Crowbar person there too.
It did, yeah. We were inundated with fleshy encounters during my brief sojourn to the UK.
It was good. I got to meet you, I got to meet Graham, I got to meet Tom Francis.
And sundry other people related to this podcast as well.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, no, that's right. Excellent fun was had by all, I assume.
I know, I hated every minute of it, but, I put on a brave face. It's fine. But happy King Week, Jamie.
Happy King Week, yeah. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of the monarchy, and you just can't get enough of prostrating yourself in the muck before them like a fucking peasant.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it when people get like pointlessly horny for incredibly right-wing politicians as well, because they're dressed up like Dark Souls bosses.
I love their vulgar trinkets covered with stolen gems. That's what I like most about them.
It's really good. I love the tender kiss that William gave his dad.
Did you see it live? Did you were you out there with your bunting, desperate to catch a glimpse of this parade of fur-cloaked bellends?
I did. I did not see it live, nor did I watch any footage of it beyond aforementioned mordant porn. I was just there for the memes, just there for the dank memes on Twitter later on. But my God, what an absolute shower of cunts. I can't be dealing with them.
It's
ridiculous.
So weird. That's so strange about it for me is how like simultaneously new and not new the whole thing is. Like I mean, obviously you got a new king, so you could put that in the new column. But it's also he's not new, is he? I've been sick of that fucker for decades. Like I felt like I was born sick of him. Also, monarchy. That's not new, is it, Jamie? That's definitely in the old column. And some might say too old. It should be best left in the fucking past, along with like rickets and shitting in rivers.
It is absolutely everything that sucks about this country. Our endless reverence towards whatever the fuck that represents, conjoined with our deep and abiding love of public displays of snivelling from all sides. Essentially, it's just a big festival of awful.
But the really weird bit of it is all the fucking magic that they brought into the ceremony, like actual magic artifacts, like swords and rocks that have somehow been imbued with occult meaning, given really like names that you would get from the most banal fantasy loot table, like the glove of fate or whatever. And all of this stuff, like the weird shit, like spooning oil onto Charles' naked torso. Like what the fuck? It's so mad. And we haven't agreed to any of it. I don't remember like making any of this part of my national identity. And like the thing is, like Elizabeth lived for such a fucking long time that we haven't seen a coronation in what, I don't know, three generations, right? At least.
I believe it's been 4,000 years since the last one.
And yet we were told all of this stuff, like these fucking rocks with names, is all very traditional. But like, traditional to whom? Not to anybody who's currently alive.
It's this weird, it's like they've got this weird like box, like an old box of old games in the attic. But instead of games, it's this like ridiculous box of insane colonial, plunder that they're going to sort of smear on each other. I guess they'll just put it back in until the next one, which likely won't be such a long wait.
Anyway, do you know what else has been poured like magic oil onto the body of a geriatric monarch?
Tell me.
That's right. 10 out of 10 review scores have been poured. This is a perfect segue onto The Legend of Zelda: Tears of a Kingdom.
Oh.
And that's a game that we aren't going to talk about because we are rebellious Republicans and we shun the insipid, cap-doffing, forelock-tugging, monarchic propaganda of the Legend of Zelda series, and fittingly, much like the proletarian spirit itself, are consigned to the darkest dungeon. 2.
Darkest Dungeon 2, yes. Another long procession towards a horrifying Lovecraftian centre somewhere deep in the souls of man. Yes, I've been playing Darkest Dungeon 2. I mentioned it on the last pod I recorded, which was a long time ago, but I was talking about that with Tom S. And then listening back to that podcast triggered me into actually buying it again, which I'd already done on Epic. So I did it. I did a stupid thing, which was not just wait for the early access to be over, but just play the last 2 weeks of a year-long early access run that they did. So yeah, Darkest Dungeon 2. So in context, Darkest Dungeon 1 I think is a wonderful game. It is a game that really, really got to me in a way that isn't at all good. Like it really, it's like pleasingly Lovecraftian what that game did to me, but also horrifyingly Lovecraftian. Because what happened was I was having a tricky time of it at work. I can't even remember what was going on, but it was a bit of a tricky time, and I was like, I don't know what I'll do. I'll displace the anxiety I'm feeling about my career and my chosen life path and all the people who depend on me by not working, but instead pouring 50 hours in 1 week into a campaign of Darkest Dungeon, which I played obsessively, sort of at the exclusion of all other activities. And I think I got about 50 hours in. I got to my first voyage into the Darkest Dungeon, which is like, it's the beginning of the end game, but you're not quite there yet in that game. It's, total party wipe. And I realized as I was playing that section that the whiff noise the game makes when you fail to make a hit was like triggering something terrible inside me. Like really like something explosive and horrible was happening within me. And I realized I was far, far, far too deep in this game, which is wonderfully one-to-one with what the game is about and what it's trying to engender in you, but I went too far. And I had to kind of like, total party wipe on that mission, and I had to be like, right, I'm uninstalling this now. This is this has gotten to me in ways that I do not want it to get to me. And since then I've gone back and I've never actually completed it, but I have sort of clicked around with it, and it hasn't been a deeply unnerving form of psychological torture. It's just been fun. So I felt safe enough to get into Darkest Dungeon 2 when it came out. One of the reasons that Darkest Dungeon 1 caused such unyielding anxiety towards me is because it's one of those games a bit like the modern XCOMs, particularly XCOM 2, which has 2 layers of gameplay. It has the sort of JRPG-inspired combat stuff, which I absolutely adore, and then it has a big it's your town basically that you're upgrading, and then you're using that town to upgrade your heroes and various aspects of your play as you go along. And the type of brain I have, I'm just never good at managing those two things and combining them together to kind of create success. I always just feel completely overwhelmed and sort of put off by it, really. The fun never quite unifies. And which is why Darkest Dungeon 2 is such a pleasure for me, because they've been very clear on their sort of stated aim for this game, which is not to kind of really try and recreate Darkest Dungeon 1, or to kind of even do a sequel to it, but is to try and create a kind of different experience, which has this roguelike form. And for me, it's perfect, because it feels like they've really listened to players like me who love Darkest Dungeon, love all the the combat and the art and the music and all the kind of the world of it, and come up with something that kind of preserves all that, but makes the metagame and the combat much more closely linked and much less, much more kind of closely entwined as well. So you're not making decisions that are somehow going to screw you, 9 hours later when you realize you should have upgraded a different thing. The roguelike structure means that you're on a map that looks like a kind of Slay the Spire map. Actually has a very similar structure in terms of the kind of fights and bosses and encounters as Slay the Spire, although you do get to drive a coach and horses through this kind of dark, crumbling world to your ultimate destination. And it's just run-based. So I believe a successful run would take about 4 hours rather than the sort of 50 to 90 that a Darkest Dungeon 1 could take. And that layer, even though there are upgrades that you do after collecting points on each run for hitting various conditions, It's much more run focused, and so that aspect of it is just great because that's perfect for me because I was never very good at the meta stuff in the original game. The game itself, and I know you've played a little bit of it, the combat's pretty similar, but what I would say is that the art and the animations and the music and sound are just second to none, are absolutely amazing. They've managed to preserve the kind of beautiful sort of 2D sprites type stuff of the original, and turn them into these absolutely sumptuously conceived models for both the heroes and the enemies. There's so many little movements they do. There's one enemy who's like a drummer, like a kind of guy, a bad enemy who will bang his drum and buff the other kind of enemies in his party. And the way that they've animated his drumming moves and the way that the sound blends into that, and like there's one moment where after a particular drumming move, he spins his drumstick round and just lifts his visor up on his helmet with the drumstick after it's just sort of fallen down in front of his face. And it's just so characterful and wonderful. And then you've got Wayne June's voice booming over everything, using words like bituminous, which is a very Marsh word, actually. It's words that I can imagine you using on a podcast and going, oh, I'll have to look that one up.
Not it with a delicious French-Canadian accent, I have to say.
Absolutely. So, and just the sort of sound profile of the whole game is amazing. It has this kind of screaming soundtrack which kind of never stops kind of squeezing the life out of your bones, and that those sounds that were such existential torture to me a few years ago are back, and once again it's kind of, you can feel it kind of really get to you. It's extraordinary. So I'm having a great time with it. Some of the baddies are really disgusting and horrible. There's one boss called the Librarian, who is a big flaming guy on a one of those kind of ladders that you have in libraries, who throws burning books at you. And he's horrible, and I've died to him many times. And another boss who is a series of hanging padlocks, which somehow manages to be absolutely obscene and disgusting as well. One other thing I really like about it is you have these hero stories where you go to these shrines and your hero will remember something that happened to them before they kind of went on this terrible voyage. And in that, they'll often use the kind of standard gameplay of Darkest Dungeon to tell a little story. So one I played today, and this is just the first one for the Grave Robber, so very minor spoilers, is they tell a story of you were the wife of this drunken arsehole. And the moves that you're given in your kind of little scene you have with him are kind of like placate. So you're trying to placate him, and you have to placate him enough for him to stop attempting to clobber him so you can poison his drink and kill him. And they all do that in in-engine combat sequence where you're sort of trying to find your way to poison his drink, and so you can puke his guts up. So that is the game basically. I'm kind of crazy addicted to it at the moment. It's really good fun.
That art style is incredible. I was really worried when they announced that the next game would be 3D, because the first game has such striking style based on Barassa's, I don't know what his first name is. He's Barassa on Twitter, but his art style is just these really thick sort of line arts, really inky line art, colored between, but the kind of it's essentially, it could easily be two-tone, like there's just incredible stark shadows, and translating that to 3D, I would have thought was impossible. I actually really dislike, generally speaking, the sort of faux cartoon style that a lot of games in the early 2000s went for, like Borderlands particularly, where there was some amount of like cell shading, and then textures on the character just inexplicably had some amount of hatching on them. That really annoyed me, because that's not how shadows work. That's not what hatching means. You can't just turn like the plane of a surface hither and thither and expect the hatching to make sense. Still, hatching represents like shadow and depth. Anyway, but the point is that this game manages to avoid this somehow, and like however those models are manipulated through animation, each frame of that animation still looks like a perfect piece of line art. It's really remarkable.
With such a sense of weight as well, like the way that you're one of the many of the characters will swing their weapon, and then as they dart back into the lineup, the weapon will fall to the ground and they'll drag it along the floor back towards them.
Well, I was exactly going to say that they, in fact, what they do is they almost never swing their weapon. Like when you attack somebody, it cuts almost instantaneously to the point of collision and then retracts. And that's like I think that probably has a name in like kung fu film cinematography or something like that. But it makes everything feel incredibly powerful and instant. Yeah, amazing stuff.
The Vestal in the first game, she's a nun who fires holy bolts from the sky. In the original game, she was her design looked a bit like a kind of I don't know how to put it other than to say she was hornier than she's kind of horny nun, I guess would be an apt description of her. And in this game, she doesn't look at all horny. She looks furious, and she's holding a big book that she looks up from, performs her moves, and then returns her furious, steely gaze back down to the book and flicks through pages while everyone else is taking their moves. It's just glorious. I just love it so much. It's a game that does so much with its art and its design and its character work. I don't think it would work anything like as well without it. And the fact that I didn't mention it, but like the main kind of dynamic of the characters, rather than before when these were characters who hopefully persist through many tens of hours of games, are only going to be on this one run. And so one of the key ideas is trying to engender relationships between them by yeah. So you've got these meters between characters that are either going to fill up or down, depending on various things that can either be like, this character keeps healing this character, so they're going to form a relationship. But the same character not healing another character would mean that they might have a negative relationship. The positive relationships eventually turn into like really amazing buffs, like incredible stuff. Like every time this character does a certain move, the other character will get a free move, which is like a huge thing in this game. So that's really cool. And then, what's also quite cool is that the negative relationships. So, for example, I was about to land the killing blow on one of the bosses in the game. But what happened was I had a negative relationship of like hatred, I think it was, between two characters, which meant that when my character went to deliver that blow, the other character stabbed them in the back and killed them. They happened to be on death's door already, and so they just died. And it was just, it was just really funny because I hadn't accounted for it. And obviously,
was it funny? That's the kind of thing that would make me flip out and heave my PC through a window, I think.
It was one of those things where it's telegraphed enough to you that this sort of thing is possible. And having a character on death's door and a character standing behind them who hates them with every kind of fiber of their being, and is slowly going mad from all the Lovecraftian beasties. It didn't make me go crazy because it just felt in universe. And actually, generally, because the runs are shorter and because you've got a bunch of kind of unlockable points, that are more plentiful the better you've done on a run. But because, I mean, like the first chapter, I think I understand the geometry is that like there's a series of chapters which build to a kind of the longest, most intense run of the game you can do. The first one is like basically 2 areas long, and so the time sink is never that brutal, and you're always going to be unlocking stuff when you get back. So something like that happening, the game is much more set up to allow you to enjoy it like a death in Spelunky, rather than in Darkest Dungeon, where it felt like an absolute tragedy to lose one of your characters deep into the game. Yeah.
Do the combat synergies work pretty much as they did in the first game?
More or less. I mean, they've simplified it a lot. They've made the numbers much chunkier and bigger, or rather smaller. They're sort of easier to understand, I guess, is what I mean. The numbers are smaller and therefore more significant. The percentages are always very, very like, this will add 25% chance of so-and-so, rather than like before where it could have been like, well, this trinket gives you 2% and, and this one gives you 1%, and it all kind of adds up. So they've done a much clearer job on that. And they've also, you can press a button to bring up the kind of tokens screen at any moment. And the tokens are all of and there's a lot of them, the various buffs and debuffs and special states that you characters can get into. And you find yourself looking at that a lot because there's loads of them. They're often quite similar, but understanding them is key to success, I think. And I'm just sort of, pushing at the edges of them at the moment. But it's done pretty well. Like there's one move that most characters have a move that will basically afflict an enemy with something called combo, and that means that if one of your guys does another thing on them that affects that same symbol, then something cool will happen basically. So it's set up to kind of get you to find those synergies without being like a high level genius for those things. Like I'm an idiot with this stuff, so I really appreciate being kind of pointed in the right direction with those symbols, and the spells and the skills will literally say things like, if enemy has this smiley face on them and you hit them with this, it will blind them or stun them and stuff like that. So it's nicely grokkable, and you don't have to fiddle around in sub menus to find out what stuff does.
Have you kind of experimented? I assume there's new characters and stuff.
I haven't played any of the newer characters yet. I've only unlocked a couple. I have to admit, I'm kind of scared of the new characters. I feel a bit nervous about them. I kind of want to stick with the guys I know for now. I mean, there's one of the characters in Darkest Dungeon is the Flagellant, who is this kind of insane-looking guy. This was in the original game, and they've just added him for the sort of 1.0 release. And he was the guy, angry-looking guy, sort of standing in supplication, and he was at his most powerful if you can kind of keep him on the brink of death. So as long as he's just like about to die, his like skills are massively buffed. So a lot of your time with him is about trying to damage him and hurt him without killing him, so that he can use his like the baddie in the Da Vinci Code sort of levels of guilt, Catholic guilt, to fuck people up basically. So I'm quite excited to unlock the Flagellant because he's ridiculous.
I'm gonna have to play it a bit more. I did I don't know, put an hour into it or something like that. I didn't I did play the first Darkest Dungeon, but my recollection of it is almost negligible. I don't think I got very far in it, possibly because the atmosphere of dread was simply too much for me, and it felt kind of like punitive in a way, which was completely unabashed and totally right for the tone of the game. But I just don't think I was in the mindset to deal with that at the time.
Yes, and Darkest Dungeon 2 does have an easy mode. Darkest Dungeon 1 they eventually put in a slightly easier mode. This one has launched with a sort of radiant torch that you can put on your stagecoach, and makes the game significantly easier, which I appreciate. Like, it's one of those things where, like, well, I'm going to try see how far I can get on default, and if I can't, I will feel no shame whatsoever in slapping that thing in my truck and no doubt dying and on World 2 again. But actually, I can see that unlockable in the menu is a whole bunch of like difficulty modifiers and things like that, which is always good fun, like for a certain kind of person, if not me.
Is this the kind of game that once you complete, you'll be done with?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. For me, because these games don't come easily for me, I'm always going to be pretty much done. Like Slay the Spire, I've now managed to win with like 2 out of the 4 characters, I think, and that's fine for me. Like, I'll take it. I'm never going to play that game again. So yeah, I imagine it'll be similar with this one. It's wonderful how much Red Hook. Such an unfortunate name. Chris Thurston mentioned this when he first mentioned Darkest Dungeon years ago on the podcast, that they are named after the most racist H.P. Lovecraft story, which is a real shame. They should have chosen a better name, because that story is just H.P. Lovecraft visiting New York and going, "Oh, aren't there a lot of ethnic minorities here? Ugh."
Oh God.
Yeah. Anyway, but aside from that, they are really good. Like, early access has really meant early access for them, so they've actively listened to the community and they use kind of early access in its intended form, to make the game better, to give people a substantive portion of it to play. And that has like benefits further down the road, because there is now a full Steam release for a fan-made mod for Darkest Dungeon 1, which looks absolutely fantastic. And I probably will play that at some point, I think. I always love it when developers are able to do that thing of going like, we've taken this as far as we can go, like, let's hand it over to the community like completely and utterly and see what they can do with it.
Yeah, it's a big step to take.
Yeah, it must be
terrifying.
it must be a scary thing to do, but I mean, it makes people love you, doesn't it? Yeah.
So what was the so it's been in early access up until now, and then with the Steam release it's popped out of early access, is that right?
Yes, it's in 1.0. Yeah, that's right. I mean,
so what was the big difference between playing it last week and playing it this week, essentially?
Or
was it just incrementally reaching this point up until now?
So the difference was not huge differences for me personally. I'm sure if you're deep into the game, I've been playing it since the beginning, there's loads. There is that difficulty mode and a new character. They changed the geometry of the kind of runs quite significantly. So it used to be you had to like beat 4 areas to get to the boss, and now it's like 3, and one of those is just like an introductory fight. So like the first chapter, which is called Denial, is relatively short, and I feel it feels completable to me. You know, I've managed to get to the boss of that a couple of times already. So yeah, they've done that. I mean, one thing I would say is like I'm playing it on Steam Deck, and it's fine, but no controller support, which I wish they put in. And if I had my way, they would have included with launch version feels pretty standard to put some controls in there. But with the Steam Deck, it's easy to do it yourself. It just would have been nice. Although saying that, the Switch the Switch port of Darkest Dungeon had a control scheme unlike any other game ever released, which is notoriously tricky for anyone to ever understand, and involves sort of contorting your fingers in weird chords in order to do basic things like select characters and choose options.
I do like the whole. I mean, what era is it sort of equivalent to? Is it medieval or is it slightly?
It's kind of. It sort of feels Lovecrafty, I guess, like early 20th century. I think maybe very early 20th century.
Oh, really?
No, maybe not. It's kind of turn of the century, maybe, but also medieval. It's all very confusing. Yeah, it's funny. It kind of. It's anachronistic in a whole bunch of ways, but actually it feels all very consistent. So it's kind of a hard question to answer because it feels very true to whatever era it's from. Although it's not actually from any particular era. I do think that like your own work, Teeth, is slightly of a piece with it. Actually, it has a similar sense of kind of history and ahistorical monstrosities.
It feels like something I'm interested in for sure. I was, in fact, when I was playing it, I was thinking back to a book I just read called Between Two Fires, or maybe I hadn't just read it. Earlier this year I read it. Don't know why that detail's important. Nobody cares. But it's a sort of a medieval journey through plague-ridden France. But there are forces at work which are much worse than the plague itself, and it becomes a horror story, really. But that's I don't know if I'd recommend it as a great book, but it's certainly
has it got pig boys in it?
Has it got what?
Pig boys. Pig boys.
I think it does.
Yeah, there you go.
At least one pig boy.
Good.
There's a lion boy. There's other creatures. Yeah, it's horrible. Like there's some really grotty, horrible, grimy horror stuff.
More or less guarantee I'm going to read that. Excellent.
Yeah.
What have you been playing, Marsh?
I've played a bunch of games a little. So here are some very partial opinions on all of those. I played about 7 hours of Jedi Survivor, as I did promise to do. But quite a lot of those 7 hours were waiting for parts of the scenery to load in. So it's not optimized for my particular rig. I really like it, and I think there's a lot of stuff that it does which interestingly evolves what Jedi Fallen Order were doing. But I don't want to say too much about it because I know that Chris has played it as well, and he'll have much more informed takes on it, as hopefully I will when we're next able to pod together. But I will say that it's sort of been an awakening for me in some ways, because for a long, long time, like the minimum requirement specs for AAA games have been a total lie. Like I've been below consideration for most popular releases for at least 2 years now. Probably longer. and all those games just played fine, even though I wasn't meeting the minimum specs. I'm not like cranking the settings at all, and games have sort of plateaued for me at the graphical quality of the PS4. but to be honest, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I used to be a bit of a magpie for like shiny graphics, but I just find I don't particularly care as much now, and the games still look better on their lowest low setting than games in general have for every preceding year of my life, which is, I don't know why that seems striking. That's just how time works.
Yeah.
But as time has gone on, it feels weirder and weirder for me to complain that the graphics aren't, amazing. I don't particularly need to play anything on a 4K screen. I don't have a 4K screen, and I'm quite happy with textures looking blurry or whatever. Anyway, but with Survivor, we've definitely hit the point now where my PC just can't handle even the lowest settings, and my machine chugs to a standstill at various points. And that's not a criticism of Survivor. My PC, they do not specify my PC as being able to play this game, so it's lucky that it even runs. But yes, I'm about 7 hours in, and it's getting worse the longer I'm in the game. I suspect that's possibly because they've spent more time optimizing the early levels, possibly to avoid people refunding it early on. But also it does start relatively linear and then opens up in ways which would be graphically taxing. But yeah, at this point, and the current trajectory at which my PC is sweating heavily. Can you have a sweat trajectory? It's on the sweat trajectory, Jamie. But I'm probably going to have to upgrade my PC before I complete it.
It's funny. It sort of weirdly harkens back to a more civilized age when, I know you're vaguely the same age as me, and back in their 90s, you'd have that thing where you'd go and buy a PC video game from the shop, probably Virgin Megastore, and you take it home, and you'd put it in your PC and it wouldn't work. And that was just it. You try and make it work for a couple of weeks, and then you try and patch it with some early internet patches, and it wouldn't work. And that was just £40 that you would never see again, and a game that you would just own now and never play. I did that with several games, and then that went away for a while, and now it's back for you specifically.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try and resuscitate my PC's chances. I think I need to. So I've taken some advice. I will probably be in our Discord channel begging the more educated members of our community to help me at some point. But more RAM, new graphics card, those seem to be the things that will help.
That feels like a solid choice, yeah.
But I think there's poised to be sort of announces in both the field of memory and also graphics in the next coming weeks, which might affect prices. So I'm having to sit here, and I'm also on the sweat trajectory, waiting and sweating, hoping that the prices tumble a little bit before I shell out.
Well, we look forward to further thoughts on Jedi. What's it called? Lost Survivor? Lost Man?
Just Survivor.
Oh, Jedi Survivor. Yeah. And you can ask Chris questions like, when does this take place in the Star Wars timeline? And
what are the hairy men who yell called? And then I'll misspell it in the episode title, and lots of people will be angry.
Sounds like a solid choice.
I didn't troll them on purpose, honestly. That was just a genuine mistake. But I also played Shadows of Doubt a little bit, which is currently a very, very interesting game, currently in early access. It's a murder solving game, rather, but in a proc gen city, a procedural, if you will.
Hey.
So the murders themselves are generated, and the city they're being solved in is generated, and you go to the scene of the crime, scout it, possibly commit many of your own crimes by accident, and then sort through the evidence in an attempt to kind of very loosely pin the blame on a particular person. And it's remarkable just how incredibly open and freeform that is allowed to be, and yet the kind of the purpose in the world feels very focused. There's a sort of hand-holdy tutorial murder, which is set in a static seed of the game, so you can kind of get acquainted with stuff. A name is slid under your door on a piece of paper, and then you look up that name in the phone book, and you figure out what address they live at. You go there, you break in, you find a corpse, you inspect the corpse, you steal things for no obvious reason, you scan for fingerprints. You've got this cool little fingerprint scanner, which you can there's a safe in the apartment, and the door is open, so it's reasonable to assume that whoever killed the person left a fingerprint on the safe, and you scan it, and then you can scan the fingerprint of the dead person, and you can see if those two fingerprints match or not, and they don't. So the spare fingerprint is probably the murderers, and so on and so forth. And you sort of, as you gather this information, you can put this information into a sort of conspiracy map interface, the kind Charlie from Always Sunny with the red string everywhere, and you kind of pin all these little post-its essentially of information that you've encountered, like names and addresses and workplaces and ID cards and so on and so forth. That's about as far as I've got, really, kind of deploying its steps, because in the tutorial mission, as you kind of just get through the work of pacing around the particular crime scene, the cops turn up and you have to escape. And the tutorial encourages you to escape using the air vents, but I found it hasn't given me a sufficient number of hints about how to get out of them successfully. Because every time so far, I have dispensed myself into somebody's shower or their bedroom, and then I've been immediately beaten or shot to death. I don't know, maybe I should just hang out in the air vents until the cops leave, but it's not quite clear where they are, or if they have left, or if they ever do. And you eventually start to get cold in the air vents as well, which seems like a bad thing. So yeah, I've restarted several times, and still haven't found a way out of out of the building. The other thing that's about it that I suspect will be finessed across the course of early access is I mean, actually, maybe this won't be finessed. This is possibly part of the point of the game, is that the amount of information you can gather and pin to your conspiracy board is absolutely boggling. And I found it very difficult to manage that space by just pinning every single piece of information I can in there. And I suspect that, just by scooting around the scene of the crime in the tutorial, I'd accumulated more information than I could literally fit on the screen. And I suspect the game is intended for you to make more sensible decisions about what is relevant and what isn't relevant. It wasn't obvious to me how I would go about making a decision on what was relevant and what wasn't. Having known about crimes in reality, it often seems like the maximum amount of information you can collect is the best amount of information you can collect. So I'm not quite sure how I was meant to sift and do that on the go as well, when potentially the cops might burst through the door. That felt like a hazard, because if you just simply don't get enough information, then I just don't know how. At that point, the game is completely defunct. Like, you're just not going to solve the crime. I don't know where it goes from there.
It's interesting
because I keep on dying in people's showers. But yes,
absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the fantasy you want, some people just want the fantasy of tying things together with red string on a board, and that's well and good. I guess the other fantasy that you might want is the moment where you're staring at a jumble of massive information and slowly something comes into focus that you hadn't seen before. Like in that Frasier episode where he tries to solve one of his dad's old cases and gets convinced that it was a monkey that was the killer, which is a very funny episode. There's probably better examples than that. So it's it's if the game will be able to generate those moments that will be the kind of acid test for it, I think. If you can have that thing where there is that huge massive information and you suddenly move one to one side and you suddenly see something you didn't before, that would be cool if they could pull that off.
Yeah, I suspect one easy thing that it could do that it doesn't do, and surprises me that it doesn't do, is just pause time when you're on the conspiracy board screen. Because it feels like that process of sifting information is something that you should sit down and like. I quite like games where there's like an organizational aspect. I think I talked about Strange Horticulture the other on one of the previous podcasts, where you essentially labeling and sorting plants and so forth. And I feel like it's necessary to organize the information carefully in this. But because you're going through the crime scene under time pressure, I'm just like throwing pins into this board at seemingly random, and then working out where they should go, what information they should sit beside is a momentous task then thereafter. And I just feel like why not just pause time and allow me to really think about how I'm organizing the information I'm collecting. That would be a big relief. But talking of evil monkeys, I learned the other day that the Earl of Sandwich, who gave his name to the sandwich in that he invented the sandwich, once mistook a monkey for the devil. That's my little bit of history knowledge for you. Yeah.
Is there any other information, or is this just something he said in passing one time?
No, I believe he was. I think he saw a monkey and was convinced it was it was Satan.
Had he seen a monkey before? Because I can sort of understand if you'd never seen one before or knew what one was.
One suspects he had not. But then, I mean, he was also a massive piss artist, so he could have just been shit-faced. It's not easy to tell, really.
Did he invent the sandwich, or did he just give his name to the sandwich?
He gave his name to the sandwich, but his dickheadedness prompted the creation of the sandwich because he needed a quick snack between losing hands at cards,
right?
And he refused to leave the gambling table, so he demanded that some meat be brought to him, just slap it between two pieces of bread. And so some servant, in fact, created the sandwich and brought it to him. But then other people in the gambling dens that he frequented, so the story goes, started ordering it as well, saying, "I'll have what sandwich is having." And then, that became, "I'll just have a sandwich." And thus the sandwich was born, possibly completely apocryphal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know that thing about the Broccoli family who own the James Bond?
James Bond. Oh, yeah.
And like,
no, what about them?
Well, I saw a tweet about it, like, oh god, broccoli. Imagine being named after broccoli. How posh must you have to be to have at some point that decision been made? But actually, but they're such an old and posh family that broccoli is named after them. They're the original broccoli. Because some ancestor deep in their past managed to create broccoli through various breeding systems. So yeah, I always thought that was kind of insane.
Wow. Yeah, trying to one up Sir Arthur Choke and his artichoke. That's a lie. He doesn't exist. Shall I tell you about the final game that I've been playing as well?
Please.
That is the Case of the Golden Idol DLC called the Spider of Lanka. And we've talked about the Case of the Golden Idol multiple times on this podcast. It's a very good mystery-solving sort of point-and-click information game, somewhere between like a hidden object game and the Return of the Obra Dinn. But I won't rehash exactly how it works and so forth now, because you can just go back and listen to the podcast in which we discuss it. And it's very good. It's still good. And the DLC is also good.
Still good.
It's a prequel, and it comprises 3 very elaborate scenes, almost on the cusp of being overwhelming, in fact. I think if I'd come to it hot on the tails of completing the main game, that would have felt more natural. But jumping back into it, I was a little bit panicked by the amount of stuff going on that I'd have to kind of work out. And I would suggest to anybody returning to the game, if they've already played it, they should probably, because it's a prequel, it refers to things in the opening scenario of the main game. And for the prequel DLC to make complete sense, you have to remember some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you've played the original, it's probably worth popping open your save game and rereading the synopsis that you get as a sort of reward for completing the first scene, just so you know who these characters are and where they're going. But I get the impression that this is going to be the first of many bits of DLC. Perhaps I would be absolutely delighted by that. It's a great format, and I don't think it would get tired by lots and lots of DLC in the same format being issued. I'd play every one, I think.
I always think that episodic thing is a kind of holy grail in video games that seems like self-evident that like it should happen a lot, and it tends not to. Like the Telltale games kind of made a fair attempt on it, and then things like Life is Strange have done various versions of it and things like that. But like, it's just something I think is a really nice proposition if there's a game that you love and they release a whole bunch of episodes for it. Like, I always think that's something I would quite like to have, and I've never really had before. The closest I can think of is like Kentucky Route Zero, although they were like leaving like many years between releases. But even still, that was like wonderfully exciting of like, you know, waiting for the next one to come along and having sort of no idea what was going to be in it. And I think particularly with games that have a kind of narrative spin for them, it's really interesting. Wildermyth is a game I'm like trying to get back to quite soon, and I think that game has a like perfect platform for new story content to basically be added indefinitely. And I think that would be, you know, I'd love to like work on something like that one day where there's just kind of you know, a sort of service game but with story instead of shitty cosmetic upgrades.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the conventional wisdom, certainly back from the kind of days when the adventure games that Telltale were making, was that, you know, there was always diminishing returns on DLC, because you're tying the purchase of this new product to the existence of an old product, and obviously people who haven't played the old one won't necessarily get on board to play the new thing. So maybe I was going to say maybe the more sensible thing to do is just to release a large number of standalone games, but based on exactly the same format, and then bundle them potentially. But then you wouldn't have the kind of interrelationship of narrative that is maybe what attracts you to that proposition. But I mean, like you say, now there's so many service games out there, maybe people would be more willing to stick with the game through multiple seasons.
It feels like there's something there. Like I'm always thinking about like TV in the 90s, which I think is just because I was a kid then. But like the fact that a series of the X-Files would be 24 episodes, however many it was, just an endless amount of TV. And it meant you could have these like, I mean, ultimately ridiculous, but when they were up and running, entirely thrilling, like serpentine plots with, you know, arcs and twists and turns that ran over many years. And I always think that there's some version of a game that would fit into that mode. I don't know quite what it would look like or what it would be, but I do think there's something there.
X-Files was also very much Monster of the Week for the most part. So maybe that's how you do it. You have a staple of the series, which is each individual thing is very self-enclosed and standalone, doesn't require knowledge of the rest of the material, and then over time, you build a large enough audience that you can take the risk of having multi-episode arcs and tie the products together in some way.
I feel like we've just invented the MCU.
Yeah, oh God, yeah, we have. Yeah.
Shall I talk about the other thing I've been playing?
Yeah.
So I have got a new job, which I can't talk about yet, but I will very soon. For all you Jamie heads out there who are hanging on my every move. But I've got a job in the games industry, and one of the things that they have in the office is a PS5, which I think is really cool because I am a little boy and I love a new PlayStation. And they've also got a PSVR 2, which I took it upon myself to set up because I'd never really had a go on PSVR or indeed any virtual reality kit whatsoever, despite having written quite a good deal of a very bad TV show about virtual reality. When we went to a place that was supposed to give us a go on all the helmets, they wouldn't. They just wanted to talk about their own business ideas. So I never got much of a chance with the VR kit. So I set that up. The PSVR 2 is really cool. The setup is really pleasingly sci-fi, and also this is the thing that I was really really excited by. The PSVR 2 has a button on the side of it which turns the which kind of essentially simulates the visor going clear, so you can see the room around you, but it does it in this kind of sci-fi black and white kind of way. So I got into the office really early and started setting up this VR thing, which involves like painting a sort of cyber gunk on the floor to create a play space for yourself and doing a whole bunch of cool stuff like that. And then pressing a button on the side of the VR set, which, as I say, allows you to see what's going on in the room at a button press, which is really good because, you know, one of my main problems with VR, at least my anticipation would be, is that I am terrified that someone's going to come up behind me and jump on me and scare me, or rip the helmet off my head and annihilate my mind, like happens in all sci-fi movies when someone gets unceremoniously unplugged from the Matrix. I don't know if that's true for real life. But it was quite a funny moment where I was setting it up, and then I pressed the button, and there was just suddenly the cleaner was there, sort of unloading the dishwasher in the office, and I hadn't seen him there before, and he must have thought I looked like an absolute idiot wearing this big thing on my head. Anyway, so I played the box-in game with PSVR 2, which is Horizon Call of the Mountain ? I'm literally going to look up that right now. I think that's what it's called. As in Call of the Mountain, yeah. Which is spectacular, which is like a full-blown, you know, super AAA feeling VR game, which I played for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and was very impressed with, and then kind of felt like I was done with it after that. I was like, oh yeah, you climb walls, and you fire a bow and arrow, and it looks very pretty. But honestly, like, I was a little underwhelmed by it. I felt like, as my first VR experience, I was kind of really, really hoping to have my socks blown off by it. And although it was cool, it was, I don't know, it didn't blow my socks off. But then I did something which has been an ambition of mine for years and years and years, which is play the game Thumper on the VR set. The Thumper is one of my favourite games ever, I think. If you don't know it, it's the game made by a couple of people who I think at one point worked on like Guitar Hero type games and decided to go away and make the opposite of a Guitar Hero game, but with similar-ish mechanics where you are a beetle hurtling through a void, and sort of trying to sort of hit corners and notes on a kind of mad monorail heading into this kind of insane fractal space, while weird semi-ambient droning and arrhythmic pounding soundtrack comes to you, and you're sort of forced to contend with your own sense of nausea and disorientation in order to succeed through these incredibly punishing levels. It's wonderful, and can make you feel really quite sick, but in a beautiful way. It's like it's got the most physical feeling, sort of sense of momentum to it, which I just adore.
Your pitch for all the games you like seems to be, this game harmed me.
Yeah, I really do like it. I love it. I love to be overwhelmed and disorientated and upset. I think that's just like, I remember it was the first time I played it was when my baby, my first child had just been born, and she was sat on my lap sleeping, and I was, you know, up late doing the late shift, and the judder of the controller and my knee trying to keep time to the kind of the beats, which are always in kind of disgusting time signatures like 7/8, was doing a really good job of keeping her asleep. So I ended up in this kind of weird flow state where I was like, no, I need to keep the beat so I can keep my baby asleep, so I can you know, get past this level of Thumper. And also Thumper has the music in Thumper's by one of the two people who make the games, and he's also the guitarist in a band called Lightning Bolt, who are one of my favorite bands. They're like an amazing noise rock band with maybe the best drummer currently working, and this is the other guy who's also really good, and he does the music, but it's not like that music at all. It's like I say, incredibly disorientating and weird and horrible. Anyway, I decided to have a go of that on PSVR 2, and my god, it was so good. It was just so fantastic, and that was like the experience I was definitely looking forward to. Well, you know, because
how are you? I mean, what does VR bring to it? What's the change in perspective? Because in the game, when you're playing it on a desktop, you're looking down at this beetle. Are you in the beetle in VR?
You're actually not. It's in a funny way, it's not that different at all. Your view is just you're sort of maybe a little bit closer and a little bit closer, sort of into the shoulder of the beetle, maybe, but not by that much. But the ability to sort of look up and around you just gives the whole space this extraordinary sense of scale and enormity. You still control it with the the normal controller, but everything just seems on this colossal scale, and it is that sense of space that really does it. Also, I didn't know that they could do this, but the helmet vibrates as well, which is quite cool. So Thumper has all these amazing kind of almost like dubstep drops, but without the sense of satisfaction when the sound will suddenly get sucked out of something as you hit a marker. And they've done an amazing job at using the sort of vibrations in the controller and the vibrations in the helmet to sort of put that right into your body. And with both like earplugs in and the volume on max, it was just like being on really, really horrible drugs, but in a good way. And then at the end of every level of Thumper, a big face comes over the horizon. And he's a guy called Crackhead, I believe is the name the developers give him. And he has this horrible, distorted face who's the only vaguely like human-looking thing, or even like, apart from the beetle, the only like vaguely animal or sort of sentient kind of life that's there that isn't a kind of big fractal cuboid space thing flying away from you, this big horrible face full of distorted shapes. And in the game, when you play it on a normal screen, it's fine, he comes over, he is scary and freaky. In VR he is fucking enormous, and he looms over the horizon and towers above you as this kind of massive entity. And it's just absolutely spectacular and so overwhelming and disorientating and frightening. He just looks completely mental, like what he sort of portrayed as in the game, as some sort of horrible god come to swallow your beetle form and and prevent your escape from this place. And that was just amazing. And the moment when this is just the first level, you fight him at the end of every level, but the moment when you sort of send the little bead back to him, and it does a really big like dubstep drop, and he sort of splits open and all light pouring out of him. Just so good.
And you take off the visor and realize you've killed the cleaner.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. It was great. I can't wait to go back and have another go on that one, because that was just the first level as well. The game gets more and more deranged with each level. So I can't imagine what it would be like to play the New Game Plus mode on that, which is where you only get one hit, and then you have to play through the whole game in a oneer, so all like 13 levels, and you can only get hit twice. But like, I can imagine putting a VR helmet on and doing that, you just like transcend reality by the end of that. You just become molecules and become one with nature itself.
And I assume this isn't like a full body involvement. You're still using a pad and stuff, right?
Yeah. I was just sat down on a chair,
right.
in a brightly lit office, using a PS5 remote to play it. But
what kind of space are you in? Are you able to explore other games in the catalog that do require more kind of waggling and flailing?
Yeah, well, Call of the Mountain is all about like rock climbing. So,
right, yeah.
So it is. You do have these kind of weird. The remotes are very, very strange that you normally use. So Thumper just uses a normal like DualShock thing, but the normal remotes you have are these weird kind of claw things you put on your hand. Which, if anyone listening ever gets in contact with, I defy you to put them on the right way the first time around. They're so counterintuitive about which way you put your hands through them. But like, I mean, in Call of the Mountain, the rock climbing just involves, reaching out with one hand and grabbing and then pulling up with another. And to be fair to that game, I know I like negged it a little bit, but it does feel incredibly natural and incredibly tactile. Very, very early on. You sort of, as soon as you start it, you're like, oh, okay. And then with the bow and arrow as well, it's all very, very natural. I could just feel myself feeling like the stuff people talk about when they talk about the limitations of VR. And also in this game, you are sort of walking around, you're using an analog stick to control your movement. And I know like games like Alex and stuff like that had better ways of sort of compensating for that slight sense of disconnect between your body and the body of avatar you're playing. So yeah, I'll be interested to maybe play a few more VR games and get a sense of it. But it'll be hard pressed to beat Thumper because my god, that game is a masterpiece.
Well, I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about Alex.
Yeah, I'll definitely play it. I'll definitely play it one time. Is it on PSVR? I don't know if they've released it elsewhere, or is it just?
Oh, good point. Right, I see. Yeah. That probably isn't the right suggestion then. I don't know what is on PSVR actually, apart from that whale demo.
Yes, there is that. I mean, the thing is like, I believe they cost like 350 quid now for a PSVR 2, which is a lot of money, which, I'm not going to spend myself. But it does feel like it's getting towards, a much more affordable place now, that they'll be a bit more accessible. It's not out of the realms of possibility that an office space, will have one of those in there for people to have a go on and things like that. So I think that's, it's a good sign of like these things becoming a little bit more usable for normal people and not like people with 350 quid to spend on that, on top of a console as well.
I'm still not really into the idea of communal VR because of the sharing of bodily fluids doesn't excite me. I went to the London Aquarium when I was back in the UK. Which is kind of terrible in all the ways that you might imagine it would be. But it had a weird section, which was a VR experience, all these pods, with children clambering in and greasing up all the VR equipment. And that's just like one giant Petri dish, surely.
Someone told me recently that they went to do a VR experience thing with their dad. And the one that they ended up doing was the one where you're standing on a beach while Bjork stands in front of you naked and sings into your face. And she said that it was one of the most awkward and unnerving experiences they'd ever had. She's like really close to you and completely naked and singing right at you. And apparently it was just like, if you found yourself in this situation in real life, you wouldn't be entranced, you'd be deeply frightened. Leave me alone, Bjork. Try to enjoy a day out with the kids.
Is that it? Shall we call time on this podcast?
Let's call time on it, yeah.
Very well. That is the podcast that we're going to do for you today. All these recordings are uploaded as videos to YouTube. You can find other stuff by us at the address for that, which is youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too if you like at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. You're only charged for the podcast we make. We don't charge you weekly, and we don't charge you for the lock-ins currently. So it's just these game pods that you get charged for. Or you can just join our lovely Discord community. They're lovely. The link for that is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been a grovelling peasant not worthy of a name.
And I've been king of all men.
And as Penny Mordaunt, the wielder of the Sword of Time, says, the king's example is that of love, and that is endless and timeless. We live in a cynical world to which the only antidote is service, duty, and love. Thank you from the future Prime Minister of the UK for that message.
Fucking hell.